In the brutal winter of 1942, on a forgotten stretch of the Eastern Front, a single Soviet volunteer, a former history teacher from Leningrad, was given an impossible task: to stop the relentless German advance through a key mountain pass with nothing but her wits, her will to survive, and one precious sniper rifle. As the snow turned crimson and the ice echoed with the cracks of her rifle, she wasn't just fighting enemy soldiers. She was battling the very limits of human endurance, where each breath was a gamble and every shot echoed with the ghost of the woman she used to be. This is the true story of how one bullet, one moment, and one unseen woman changed the fate of thousands. The cold was not just a feeling. It was a living thing that stole into the bones and settled there. Alina Vasilievna, once a teacher of 19th century poetry at Leningrad University, now a private in the Red Army, felt it gnawing at her with every shallow breath. The world had shrunk to this. The white hell of the Caucasus foothills, the groan of wind through the narrow Kharovsk Pass, and the weight of the Mosin-Nagant rifle across her back. Her hands, once skilled at turning the delicate pages of Pushkin, were now wrapped in ragged wool, stained with gun oil and frozen earth. Her assignment was a death sentence wrapped in orders. German mountain troops, the elite Gebirgsjäger, were pushing hard through the pass. Soviet defenses had crumbled, morale was a myth, and the only strategy left was desperation. A colonel with eyes like slate had looked at her file, seen her pre-war hunting accolades, squirrel and grouse in the forest near her family's dacha, and made a wild, brutal calculation. You, Vasilievna, you know scopes. You will go to the high ridge overlooking the pass. You will delay them. By time for reinforcements that may or may not come. No squad. No spate. Just delay. A euphemism for die trying. The climb to her position took 2 days through a labyrinth of ice and rock. Each step was a battle. The air grew thinner, sharper. Her pack, with its meager rations of hardtack and frozen lard, felt like a millstone. She carried not just the rifle, but 60 precious rounds of ammunition. Each cartridge was a golden slug of potential, to be spent with infinite care. She found her nest not by design, but by collapse, stumbling into a shallow cave formed by a tumble of granite slabs. It offered a jagged window overlooking the serpentine trail of the pass below. The wind scoured the entrance, but it was shelter. It would have to be. The first day was a ritual of stillness. She arranged her few possessions: the rifle, the ammunition, a small pot for melting snow, a tin cup, a dull knife. She mapped the landscape below through her scope: the bend in the path, the cluster of frost-blasted pines, the boulder field that offered cover. She was a scholar of this new, violent geography. The silence was immense, broken only by the wind. It was in this quiet that the ghosts came. Not ghosts of the dead yet, but of the living. Her father's voice, reading block by the fireplace. Her students' faces, eager and bright, in a sunlit classroom now shattered by artillery. The laugh of her brother, Dmitri, somewhere at the siege of Leningrad, if he was still alive. She shoved them down. Sentiment was a luxury that would get her killed. The Germans came on the 3rd day. They were not the faceless horde of propaganda posters. Through her scope, they became individuals. Young men, moving with expert discipline, but with a weariness in their posture she recognized. They were breaking trail, setting ropes, their breath pluming in the still air. She watched an officer point, a sergeant check a map. Her heart was a frantic bird in her chest. The poetry of her old life offered no guidance here. There was only the mechanics of the shot. Breathe out, still the heart, feel the trigger's crisp break. Her first target was not a man, but a machine. A soldier was setting up an MG-34 machine gun on a tripod, covering the advance. The range was long, the wind tricky. She calculated, her mind cold now, a separate thing from her trembling body. The crack of the rifle was obscenely loud in the silent mountains. The gunner slumped. Chaos erupted below. Shouts in a guttural language echoed up the cliffs. They scrambled for cover. searching the empty white slopes for a threat they couldn't see. She had fired the first note of her deadly solo. She had drawn their attention. Now, she had to survive it. She slithered back from a ledge, pressing herself into the frozen stone as mortar rounds began to walk up the slope, their explosions muffled by the deep snow. Dirt and ice rained down on her. This was no longer an assignment. It was a duel, and she was alone. The duel settled into a terrible, frozen rhythm. Alina became a creature of the dawn and dusk, the only time she dared risk movement to melt snow for water. Thirst was a more immediate enemy than the Germans. Dehydration would cloud her judgment, and her judgment was all she had. She rationed her fuel tablets sparingly, often just sucking on ice chips until her lips cracked and bled. The Germans adapted. They no longer moved in open clusters. They became shadows flitting between rocks, their movements swift and unpredictable. They knew a sniper was there, a phantom picking them off. They brought their own snipers up, men with high-powered scopes and winter camouflage smocks. One afternoon, a bullet sparked off the rock 6 inches from her head, the whine of its passing a second after the impact. She froze, not even breathing, for an hour, pressed into the ice at the back of her cave. The hunter had become the hunted. This forced a change in her. She could no longer fire from the same position twice. Each shot demanded a new hide. She began to crawl, a slow, agonizing process through ice tunnels she carved with her knife and the rifles, but connecting her main cave to smaller observation points. Her world shrank further to a network of frozen burrows. She learned to read the wind on a thread she hung with a scrap of cloth, to judge distance by the way a man's figure blurred in the milky air. The mathematics of survival replaced the meter of poetry. The cold was a constant, grinding torture. Sleep was a dangerous temptation. To sleep deeply was to freeze to death. She dozed in fits, jerking awake to stomp her feet and slap her arms, the sound terrifyingly loud in her own ears. Frostbite teased her toes and fingertips. She rubbed them with snow, the pain a fiery blessing proving they were still alive. Then came the storm. For 2 days and nights, a blizzard screamed through the pass, a white wall of fury that erased the world. Visibility dropped to zero. The German advance halted. In the utter isolation, Alina faced a different kind of enemy, her own mind. The howling wind became voices, her mother singing, the colonel giving orders, the screams of the men she had killed. She talked to herself, reciting poems she could remember, then recipes, then just lists of names. She began to hallucinate. A samovar steaming in the corner of her cave, a black cat winding around her legs. She knew they weren't real, but their comfort was a palpable lie she clung to. When the storm cleared, the world was reborn in a deadly, pristine silence. And the Germans were moving again, this time with a new, grim purpose. They had pinpointed her general location. She watched through her scope as a squad began to climb. Not the main path, but the steep slope directly toward her ridge. They were coming for her. A slow, methodical hunt. She had 2 choices: flee deeper into the mountains and freeze, or turn her sniper's perch into a fortress of one. She chose the fortress. With numb fingers, she prepared her final 60 rounds. She laid out her knife. She piled loose rocks near a firing ledge. As the first helmeted figure appeared 200 meters below, cautiously scanning the rocks, Alina Vasilievna, the teacher of poetry, made a quiet peace with her death. But she would not make it easy for them. The price for this pass would be written in blood, and she held the pen. The climb was a slow, grueling probe. The German Jebergsjäger were experts, moving from cover to cover, their eyes scanning the snow-blanketed rocks above. Alina counted 5. They were not charging, they were flushing. One would provide covering fire while another advanced. It was a professional, lethal dance. She let the first man get close, terribly close. She could see the stubble on his chin, the intent look in his eyes as he peered over a boulder. Her position, a narrow crevice smelling of damp stone, and her own fear was perfect. He was looking higher up at the main cave entrance she had left as a decoy. When he moved a swift dash across a 3-meter gap of open snow, she took him. The shot was clean. He fell without a sound. The crack of the rifle rolled down the mountain like thunder. The immediate response was a hail of automatic fire, chipping the rock face above her, showering her with debris. They knew her approximate location now. She wormed backwards through a tight ice channel she had scraped out days before, emerging at a secondary position 10 meters to the west. She waited, her breath a shallow rasp in her throat. Silence descended, more frightening than the gunfire. They were communicating, adapting. An hour passed. Then, a new sound, the distinctive thump of a grenade launcher. The explosion was deafening, erupting at the entrance of her decoy cave. They were trying to collapse it or kill her with concussive force. Snow and rock dust billowed. She used the noise and chaos to crawl back to her primary ledge, a move they wouldn't expect. It was there she saw the gambit. 2 men were attempting a wide flanking maneuver, far to her left, navigating a treacherous ice field to get above her. The third provided covering fire from the front, pinning down a position she was no longer in. They were smart. They had her in a pincer. A strange calm settled over her. The fear burned away, leaving only a crystalline focus. The man on the ice field was leading, testing his footing. She estimated the range, adjusted for the sharp downhill angle, and led him just a fraction. She fired. The bullet hit the ice at his feet, a warning shot that sent splinters of ice flying. He flinched, lost his balance, and slid 20 feet before arresting his fall with his ice axe. He was trapped, exposed. She didn't take the second shot. Let him be a burden to his comrade. Let them use energy and attention to rescue him. She shifted her aim to the man providing cover fire. He was hunkered behind a rock, only his shoulder and the side of his helmet visible. It was an impossible shot for most. But Alina was no longer most. She was a part of the mountain, of the cold, of the rifle. She aimed not at the helmet, but at the rock just beside it. The bullet struck, fragmenting, and a shard of granite or lead found its mark. He cried out, collapsing back. Non-fatal, she thought, but neutralizing. The flanking maneuver was broken. The wounded man on the ice was shouting. The light was beginning to fade, the blue shadows of the high mountains lengthening, bringing a deeper, more deadly cold. A whistle blew from below, 2 sharp blasts. Retreat. They were pulling back, defeated for the day. They would not face the mountain phantom in the dark. Alina slumped against the rock, trembling not from cold, but from the adrenaline leaching out of her system. She had survived the assault, but she was now completely out of water, nearly out of fuel, and her sanctuary was known. The victory fell hollow. The night would be the longest yet. As the stars emerged, cruel and bright in the frozen sky, she heard a new, distant sound from the east, the faint, rhythmic rumble of artillery. Not the sharp crack of mountain guns, but the deep-throated boom of heavy howitzers. The reinforcements, they were real, and they were still days away. She had bought time, but the cost was written in the hollows of her cheeks and the shake in her hands. The mountain pass was quiet, but the war within her was louder than ever. The artillery was a heartbeat in the distance, a promise that pulsed through the stone. For Alina, it was both hope and a curse. Hope, because her impossible task had meaning. The main Soviet line was reforming, gathering strength for a counterpush. A curse because the Germans below heard it too. Their movements the next morning were frenetic. Through her scope, she saw the change. It was no longer a careful advance, but a frantic effort to force the pass before the hammer fell. Trucks and tracked vehicles, previously hidden, were now trying to navigate the narrow track, their engines whining in the thin air. Men worked with desperate energy to clear obstacles, to set up mortar positions. Time had run out for them, too. Alina knew her role had shifted. She could no longer just delay individual soldiers. She had to become a strategic thorn, aiming for the gears of the machine. Her ammunition was down to 23 rounds. Each one had to count like 10. She chose her target, an officer who was clearly in nerve center, barking orders, pointing at maps spread on a jeep's hood. He stood by the cluster of frostbitten pines, a perfect landmark. The range was extreme, near the very limit of her rifle's capability. The wind had picked up, gusting unpredictably from the north. She lay in a new hide, a coffin-shaped depression under an overhang, her body almost entirely encased in ice. She emptied her mind of everything but the feel of the stock against her cheek, the tiny, perfect world inside the scope's crosshairs. She saw the officer turn, his face young, anxious. He was a man, with a life, with fears. She pushed the thought away. He was a catalyst. She exhaled half a breath, held it, and between heartbeats she took the shot. The crack echoed. A fraction of a second later, the officer spun and fell. Chaos erupted below, but of a different kind, a confusion of leadership. They dragged the body away, and the frantic activity stuttered, lost its direction. A deep, savage satisfaction, entirely foreign to her old self, rose in her chest. It was followed immediately by a wave of nausea. She swallowed bile. The Germans retaliated with fury. This time, they did not send a squad. They called in a mortar barrage, walking the explosions methodically across the entire ridgeline. The mountain shook. Concussions slammed the air from her lungs. Snow and rock erupted in geysers. A chunk of stone the size of her fist struck her thigh, a bolt of agony that promised a deep, crippling bruise. She curled into a ball, praying to a god she hadn't spoken to in years that her cave wouldn't be a direct hit. The world was noise and violence and shaking. When the barrage lifted, the ringing in her ears was absolute. Dust and snow mist hung in the air. She was buried under a layer of debris. She fought her way out, gasping. Peering through the haze, she saw movement. Not a squad, but a single figure. A German sniper, clad in a white oversuit, was making a bold, direct ascent up a gully she had thought impassable. He was good, moving fast during the lingering confusion. He was coming to settle the score, one hunter to another. This was the duel she had feared. She had little time. Her legs screamed in protest as she dragged herself to her highest observation post, a precarious ledge that gave a view of the gully's top. She had one chance, one shot before he crested the rise, and had the advantage. She waited, the wind biting her exposed face. Her fingers were so stiff she worried she couldn't feel the trigger. He appeared, not his whole body, but the barrel of his rifle, probing over the edge, seeking a target. It was a test. She didn't bite. Then a sliver of his goggles and helmet. He was scanning. She had a half-second window. She fired. His rifle clattered down the rocks. The man disappeared from view. Had she hit him? She couldn't tell. She lay there, exposed, waiting for a return shot that never came. Had she won? Or had he simply retreated? There was no way to know. The silence that followed was the most terrifying of all. The duel was unresolved, a phantom pain. The distant artillery boomed again, closer now. The battle for the pass was reaching its climax, and she was trapped in her silent, frozen nest, wounded, alone, with the ghost of an enemy possibly still on the mountain with her. 2 days bled into one another, a haze of pain, cold, and watchfulness. The artillery thunder was a constant drum roll now, shaking fine snow from the cave ceiling. The German column in the pass was in full, chaotic retreat. Vehicles were abandoned, their tracks useless on the ice-glazed track. Men moved in disorganized groups, their discipline shattered by the looming Soviet advance and the ever-present threat from the mountain. Alina was a specter that haunted their retreat. She fired only 4 more times, each shot aimed at a vehicle engine or a radio operator, sowing maximum disruption with minimum ammunition. She had 9 rounds left. The phantom German sniper never reappeared. She found blood on the rocks at the top of the gully the next morning, a few dark, frozen rubies on the ice. He had dragged himself away. The duel was over. Her own leg was a swollen, stiff log of pain. Infection was a real threat. She could no longer feel her toes on that foot. The climb down, whenever she decided to make it, would be a nightmare. But she held on, watching the pass empty of the enemy, watching the first cautious, ragged units of the Soviet advance scout appear from the east. They moved slowly, expecting ambush. She saw a young soldier, no older than her students, gaze up at her mountain with superstitious awe, pointing to the cave. They had heard stories, she realized. The myth of the mountain sniper had reached them. Her war, in that specific, frozen place, was over. The task was done. The impossible had been achieved. Yet, as she prepared to descend, she felt no triumph. She felt hollowed out. The woman who had climbed up was gone, left somewhere in the ice with the ghosts of the men she had killed. She gathered her few things. The rifle, now with its bolt stiff, its stock scarred. Her empty water pot, the tin cup. She left the ammunition, the remaining 9 rounds, in a neat pile on a flat rock. She would not need them. The descent was an agony that eclipsed the climb. Every step sent lances of fire up her leg. She used the rifle as a crutch, its sacred purpose reduced to a stick. It took her a full day to navigate down the slopes she had once observed through her scope. She was a wild thing, crusted in filth and ice, her eyes sunken deep in her skull. She stumbled into the Soviet forward camp at dusk. A sentry, a boy with a round face, nearly shot her, taking her for a madwoman or a ghost. When she rasped out her name, and unit, his eyes went wide. The myth had a face. They took her to a medical tent. The warmth was a physical assault, making her dizzy. A doctor, his own face lined with exhaustion, cut away her boot. He frowned at the purple, swollen flesh. As he worked, a colonel entered, a different one, younger. He looked at her, at the rifle leaning against her cot, with something like reverence. "Private Vasilievna," he said, "we have counted over 30 confirmed kills from your position. You stalled an elite battalion for over a week. You changed the battle for this pass." She stared at him, the words not quite connecting. 30. Not men. Not faces. A number. A tactical result. She nodded slowly, unable to find her voice. They gave her a medal later, in a brief, somber ceremony on a less windy day. She stood, her leg still bandaged, and accepted the small piece of metal. It felt cold and heavy in her palm. They wanted to send her to Moscow, to train other snipers, to become a symbol. She refused, quietly but firmly. The war was not over, but her part in it as a hunter was. They assigned her to a field hospital near Leningrad, sorting supplies, reading letters to the wounded. She sought the human noise, the mess of life, to drown out the mountain silence. At night, she would still startle awake, feeling for her rifle, listening for the wind in the pines. The mountain pass was quiet, but it lived inside her, a frozen landscape she would walk for the rest of her days. She had volunteered for the impossible, and she had completed it. But the true cost was not measured in days or enemy casualties, but in the quiet of a soul that had learned to speak only in the language of a single, echoing crack, a sound that would forever separate the woman she had been from the soldier she had become.